Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Coming at you once again this week. Apologies for last week. We didn't have a show last week. That was the result of whatever flu is going around. You might be able to tell I'm a little clogged up still, despite all the lozenges and other things I've been using to try and stay as healthy as possible. It's been 2 weeks that I've been wrestling with this thing, and just about everyone I know who's caught it has had a prolonged experience with it. I hope you are staying healthy. But this week, I wanted to jump in and discuss some interesting migration numbers relating to our local market here in Silicon Valley. Now, before I do, let me take a second to remind everyone that my monthly Coffee and Real Estate live chat is happening this Saturday. It's just 4 days away from today. If you're listening to the show on the day it came out on Monday, December 12th. So on the 17th of December at 10 a.m., you can head on over to Facebook. I'll put a link in the description for the show on YouTube and also on the show notes for the podcast. So if you would like to jump in, it's a great opportunity for us to review all of the statistics from the past month, look at interesting things that have happened here local in our markets, but also talk about some of those more national things that affect all of us relating to real estate, whether it's interest rates or mortgage lending or construction that's going on or shortages of different materials that might cause impacts on local real estate projects. So let's go ahead and jump in. And as we do, just to remind everyone, I am a real estate broker right here in Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know needs help achieving their goals in real estate, I would love to get the opportunity to convince them that I'm their right choice. Go on over to soldbyrobert.com. That's where you can find all of my material, including a link to the Coffee and Real Estate live chat and some great real estate tools for you to either start your home search or to get a instant home value estimate for your property if you're interested in considering selling it, or you don't want to sell it, you just want to get an idea of what your home is worth right now. Take a look at that tool. It's a quick and easy way to do it, and I strongly suggest everyone who owns a home get a quick estimate of their home's value at least once a year, just so you're calibrated to it, and as you're making your life goals and putting them down and trying to achieve them, you've got good information on what the value is of really the most valuable asset most folks have, their home. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Some interesting things to note, and I'm sort of weaving together a few different stories here or a few different concepts to try to get a handle on what's happening right here in Silicon Valley. And I'm using this to try and understand where things are going to be going over the next year, because I'm not seeing things that indicate movement in a direction that would be good for the housing market. We'll see how that plays out over the next few months. But when you take into account folks tending to move, the desire of residents to move, the layoffs that have been happening, and companies that are talking about relocating. These are all things that play into the dynamics of our real estate market and affect everybody from the South Valley all the way down in Gilroy and Hollister all the way up to Marin. I mean, these are things that absolutely impact us. And obviously Silicon Valley is more that southern Bay Area. So typically from Redwood City and San Francisco all the way down to San Jose, with bedroom communities like Morgan Hill, where I live, being the folks where a lot of folks live who commute up to fill those tech positions. So let's go ahead and jump in quick here. This is from SiliconValley.com, Bay Area, and I wanted to start with this one. This is actually data from earlier in the year. It's from October, so not super old. I've got another one that's actually from a little earlier this year as well, but. For the second year in a row, Bay Area residents are offering one of the most powerful critiques imaginable of their home. Most people who live here plan to leave. Now, this is an interesting one because understanding the mentality of people and what they do and don't want to do is something that I think can help inform us on what can we expect to have happen with the real estate market. Are we going to start to see more homes come on the market? Now, if these are folks who are homeowners who are talking about wanting to move, obviously that would indicate homes come on the market. But I don't see data on the percentage of those people who are actually homeowners. And my guess is that it would probably be more strongly represented by renters than homeowners. But I don't have any data on that. according to this, according to Russell Hancock, president and CEO of Joint Venture, a business and labor consortium, quote, there are things about the Bay Area that are really troubling. What he cited in the Flee the City, housing costs, quality of life, taxes, homelessness, being the most powerful motivators. And from just a standpoint of ground truth, people I talk to, and I have buyers who currently have searches running, and they're looking for homes in San Jose, Los Gatos, Mountain View, Morgan Hill, Gilroy. So I have a pretty wide area that some of my buyers are shopping in. In fact, I just had someone looking in Campbell the other day. And when we talk about the market, we talk about the challenges that people face. And in many cases, these buyers are also entertaining the possibility of not staying, right? They're going to come, they're going to do their thing, and then they're going to move away and go somewhere else. I get that far more frequently now than I used to. And just anecdotally, we're looking at a chart here that sort of gives us a feeling for what people's attitudes are about continuing to live here. But as someone who's been doing this a really long time, so I got my real estate license originally in 1988. And over the years, I've seen a complete flip in the attitudes of buyers and sellers, particularly sellers, where typically when I sold someone's house, they were moving somewhere else in California. In many cases, even within the same area that I served, about 80% were staying in the state and 20% were going somewhere else. Today, that's almost completely flipped around, where only 20% are planning to stay. And in fact, they're selling. Their primary reason is to get out of California. Now, I had a really big push of those in 2020 and 2021 with folks going to Idaho and Arizona and Texas, and a couple even went to Nashville. Not in those years, but actually this year I had folks who sold who ended up moving to Nashville, and that weighs heavily, I think, on our markets. Now, obviously, it's not enough to offset an awful lot of the influences that we have, but understanding the mindset of folks that live here, I think, is interesting. So if we take a look first at this chart, we're going to go ahead and go big here with this one. Let's see here. Let me see if I can there we go. I want to make sure you guys can see it all. So leaving the Bay Area voters were asked if they would be likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years. So we're not even talking about, do you ever plan to move out? Because I think we'd see different numbers here. Most folks I know who have been selling, and particularly folks who are a little later on in life, maybe they're approaching retirement, they don't plan on retiring in California. They want to sell their property in California and move somewhere else. Now, we can see the evolution of this over time, and this is a measurement of how much they agree with that statement. How likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years are you? And that's just next few years, so let's call it 3 years. In 2019, only 24% strongly agreed, but 47% agreed overall, right? But 24% strongly agreed. In 2020, 51%. So, and we've been over 50% since 2020, a number we've covered here on the show a few times, including backing that up, not just with the attitude of people, but also migration out of the area. Because what we want to do as folks trying to assess where the market's going to go, are people acting on this? Are they then renting a moving truck or getting movers to come and pick up their stuff and move them out of the state? We're going to take a look at that in a minute too. And so for my podcast listeners, obviously you can't see the chart that I'm doing right now, so that's why I'm reading this off for you. In 2021, 56%, so a 5% jump from 2020 to 2021. And obviously we were in COVID at that point, and folks were still looking to move. 30% of those folks strongly agreed, so an increase in the number of folks who strongly agreed. In 2022, we saw a little bit of a decrease, down to 53%, where 27% were strongly in agreement with the sentiment that they want to leave the state. So that is kind of amazing when you realize 50%, half the people that you encounter randomly throughout Silicon Valley, are considering the option of moving away within the next 3 years. And I think that is something that is good to keep in mind as we look at what we can do in terms of anticipating where the real estate market's going to go. So next, let's go ahead and look at Silicon Valley migration over the past 30 years. And this is another interesting one. And of course, if you're interested in these, To get more data yourself, I always encourage folks to do their own follow-up and do their due diligence on whatever they're doing. I'll include links to all of these sites in the show notes, so you'll be able to check these out on your own. Silicon Valley migration over the past 30 years. I thought this one was super interesting, and it goes all the way back to 1990. We can see that right now we are net losing the biggest numbers we've ever seen over that entire period of time. Now, obviously, for my podcast users, what we've got is the last time we saw this much of a drop was in 2002, and that is pretty much the dot-com bust, the bubble bust, the bubble bursting, the dot-com bubble bursting in the early 2000s, and we had it down to about negative 25,000. So overall, when you take into account births, deaths, migration in and migration out, we were losing about 25,000 people in that year. In this year, we're losing more than 35,000 people after you account for all of those things, births, deaths, and migration in and out. So, and that is history making. We're breaking all records, at least going all the way back to 1990. So this is something that you can have two attitudes about. We're already in a situation where we do not have enough housing for the folks that need housing. But if in a market like we see right now, where buyer demand has dropped substantially and inventories are increasing, this continuing trend, and just for clarification, this is for 2022. So we don't have the full numbers for 2022 yet. But we can anticipate them being between 35 and 40,000 net loss of population in the county. So this is really only going up to all of 2021 and part of 2022. And we need to really get a handle on how is this going to affect our local market. If we look at the next chunk of data here, this is the 10 states people are fleeing from and the 10 states people are moving to. And this is very recent. This is from November of this year, so a little more than a month ago. And let's go ahead and just scroll right down to the punchline. 10 states people are leaving. California is the #1 state that people are leaving right now. 2021 saw a net loss of over 101,000 households in California, despite a mostly pleasant climate and robust tech industry. Rising housing costs, rising taxes, and politics seem to be driving many people to look for opportunities elsewhere. Other factors that immigrants have cited are the rising threat of wildfires and the constantly increasing cost of living. Many families from the state are relocating to Texas. And we are beating out the next closest competitor for folks leaving a state by over 25,000 houses. Oh, excuse me, no, by even more than that. Where was that number? 101,000 households. 75,000 is New York's loss of households. So we beat New York, the next closest state, by over 25,000. So that is not a position I think we want to be in. We need to attack this from a variety of different areas, and we need to understand what's influencing it, because some of this is also not just what someone wants to do. Some of this is also businesses. If we look at Oracle to jettison more Bay Area space after doubling down in Austin and Nashville. Now, we've talked about Austin and Nashville before as high growth areas. And if we go back to the states, and just so we can cover the full list here, the 10 states where people are leaving the most, #1 was California. #2 was New York. #3 was Illinois. #4 was Pennsylvania. #5 was Massachusetts. #6 was Washington. #7 was Colorado. #8 was Indiana. #9 was Michigan. And #10 was Wisconsin. And the states with the greatest input of people, the greatest immigrants coming to that state, Texas is #1. They gained 12,700 residents overall in 2021. Part of the influx is due to the state's conservative political environment, which is inviting to many people from nearby liberal states. Low taxes, a robust economy, a low cost of living, and excellent weather round out the list of why Texas is a popular destination. And Austin figures high on that. I know an awful lot of folks who've moved to places like San Antonio, where it was ridiculously hot, and they were not ready for that. Florida is #2 on the list. #3 is South Carolina. #4 is North Carolina. #5 is Georgia. Now, for those of you who've been longtime listeners to the show, and you've listened to some of the interviews I've done with real estate investors, if you remember, if not, go back and check those shows out. But these should be clicking some memories for you. These should be ringing some bells. Florida, I don't think hasn't figured in really recently, but North Carolina and Georgia and Tennessee, which is number 6 on the list. I believe it was both North and South Carolina. We've talked to several investors where they found amazing opportunities in these areas where year over year they were seeing greater than double-digit growth in their return on investment. So that's kind of amazing. I think we were talking to one who had done mobile homes where they didn't, where in some cases they owned the mobile home and just rented them out, and in other cases they simply rented the space to someone and they owned the mobile home on it. North Carolina comes to mind as one place where that was happening and someone was doing amazing business there. Now, as I mentioned, number 5 was Georgia, number 6 was Tennessee, number 7 was Nevada, number 8 was Maine, number 9 was Delaware, and surprisingly, number 10 was Idaho. I would have thought Idaho, given my ground experience and what I've heard and from folks here who've moved, I would have thought Idaho would have figured higher on that list. So what can we expect? What are things that we should be thinking as buyers, sellers, and investors in Silicon Valley? How is this going to influence our market as we move into 2023? Well, I don't think it's particularly good news if you're a homeowner. All of the things we've talked about here, all of the elements that play into this scene for us are suppressing markets, right? In other words, fewer buyers or fewer folks living here mean fewer potential sellers. I don't think it's as dramatic. You can't say that all of those 100,000 households in California or all of those thousands, all of those 35 to 40,000 people that left the Bay Area were people who owned a home. They were probably folks who rented. But as someone who may want to become an investor in Silicon Valley real estate, it's important to understand, am I losing my pool of potential renters? And we are seeing a situation where that is the case. Now, what's interesting about this is that this comes at a time when we already had too little growth in terms of housing units in Silicon Valley. So a lot of these migrations out are being softened by that. But the construction we did tend to have here in Silicon Valley tended to be the kind that people want to live in least. Really good example. If you're on the Southern 85 freeway going from 101 north or going from say Cupertino south, on either side of the freeway, you can see these gigantic apartment complexes that have been built. And I have helped a couple of folks buy homes who lived in those, and they hated it. It's super crowded. It is very dense housing. And that is really the dominant type of construction that was going on in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, and not as much single family residential growth. So I think that particular area is still going to be an area that moves forward. What's interesting is I'm seeing incentives being put out as banners on those apartment complexes where they'll give you the first month, 2 months for free, or a free TV comes with your signing a 1-year lease. So it's interesting that I'm seeing incentives. I hadn't seen incentives there in a very long time. So that's an indicator that their renter pool is declining. My single family residential folks who are renting properties have not had any issues. But I've also noted that a lot of them that I've spoken to have not increased their rents as much as they might have in the last couple of years. And I think that's good. If you have good tenants, it's good to try to hold on to those folks, and better to hold on to them than raise rents, potentially lose them, and then have to go through the process of finding a new renter. So in terms of the folks who might come at it from an investment standpoint, I think if you are someone who is not an owner of an apartment complex, I think you're in a good position. But I do think that the market is changing gradually in terms of migration outward to reflect fewer folks out there interested in renting a home, whether it's an apartment or a home or a townhome. If you're someone who's looking to buy a home, I think that we're heading into a time period where you're going to see less competition and you are going to have more things to choose from, which really just fits in with data we've been talking about for a while. If you were in last month's coffee and real estate session, for instance, during that live chat, we covered the data. And again, it was definitely the market is turning, and we're starting to see it be more and more of a buyer's market. And We are not seeing that trend slow down. It is continuing to become more of a buyer's market with each passing month. And we'll see what happens this month in terms of what happened with inventory this month. Did we start to see fewer homes get listed in December? November is usually the first month when you see it. And I've got some super interesting data that we're going to be talking about this Saturday about the November numbers that indicates some interesting trends. So make sure to join me there for a more in-depth discussion of that. And for you sellers, so much of this is going to depend on where your home is. In general, across the county, average sales prices are down over 5% in Santa Clara County. It's going to depend on where you are, because right here in Morgan Hill, average sales prices are actually up 1.7%. So much of this is going to depend on your micro market. And within Morgan Hill, there are micro markets where those numbers are different as well. But the trend is continuing to decline. The amount of appreciation we've seen has gone down every month in general. The trend is down. So if you are someone who owns a home and you were looking at potentially selling in 2023 or 2024, there is an argument to be made for accelerating that effort and working now to pull your profits out of your property rather than waiting, or delaying your plans. If you were going to move in 2023 or 2024, I would suggest you wait longer than that. I think that the next 2 years are going to be a little bit more difficult for sellers than we would hope, but still something you could potentially work in. It depends on when you bought your home and how much equity you've built up. But I think you're going to get your biggest rewards either working to do something now or being able to wait beyond a couple of years. Okay, so that's about it, folks. I think that it's still, if we had a gauge that we could adjust back and forth in terms of where the market is lying, and when sellers are on one side and buyers are on the other, in terms of who's being put into a better position in our markets here in Silicon Valley, it's definitely buyers. Another thing that's interesting to note, if this is something you're considering, I am finding multifamily homes, duplexes, triplexes, quads, are all tending to stay on the market longer. And we're even to the point now where I've seen a couple of them have price reductions. And again, that's also a market related thing. I love duplexes in Morgan Hill, for instance, and one came on the market and was off of the market within a month. That just shows you how hot they are in Morgan Hill. But that is less true in some of the areas I'm seeing north in, say, San Jose, all the way up from Redwood City all the way down to South San Jose. I'm seeing slightly different performance. Things are staying on the market longer. So why do I mention that? If you are a house hacker style person who wants to jump into investing, regardless of where you are in life, house hacking is when you buy a multifamily unit and you live in one of the units and rent out the others. And then you stay there for a year or two and buy another one, keeping the first one, and you just keep leapfrogging doing that. Now, why that's a good thing is if it's 4 units or less, you can get a conventional loan. You can get a regular, I live here in this house loan, which typically gives you better rates and conditions. So keep that in mind as well. So in terms of trying to give you options, I hope I've left you with a few. It's always the goal to leave more knowledge on the table than I take up in your time. Absolutely hope we've achieved that today. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to y'all next time.